Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. I'm making this video because very soon I'm going to make a multi-part series on the subject of did Jesus really die on the cross? And if you've noticed from the title of this video, it is called the Talmud. And I'm making a little introduction video to the Talmud because I feel like this is a prequel to to my series on the Passion of Jesus. In my theory, well, I shouldn't say it's just my theory, but in the studies I have done to come up with this idea, I use the Talmud and I use first century Jewish culture to look at the New Testament and what the New Testament is saying through the eyes of a first century Jew who has a full understanding of not only his cultural beliefs but also his theological beliefs. And the Talmud enshrines what the first century Jews believed. And so many people, I want everyone, regardless of your religion, to be able to appreciate my future videos when I reference the Talmud. And I know that the one group of people that are probably going to have a bone to pick with me are Christians. Most Christians. Not all, but most. And I say this because I've watched a lot of debates where the Talmud is brought into the debate as a piece of evidence, and the Christians just dismiss the Talmud as being unauthentic or not reliable. They use the term, they say, well, you know what, the Talmud wasn't really codified until about 200 CE, so how reliable is it? And things like this. Well, I'm going to prove in this video that not only is that a double standard, but it's based on a misunderstanding of what the Talmud is, how long the Talmud has been around, and how long basically the oral tradition has been around, according to Jewish scholars. So I'm going to have several links in the description section, but I'm not going to have time to go through each article and read it in full detail. However, I will reference some things, I'll read some things, and we'll see how far we can get. Now, one thing is very clear. If you click on the first link in the description section, it'll take you to an article called The Oral Tradition. And it's from a book written by a Jewish scholar. The book is entitled, his name is Rabbi Kaplan, and he has written a book entitled The Handbook of Jewish Thought, Volume 1. And it's reproduced in this article. Now, this article makes it very clear that the oral tradition is alluded to not only in the written Torah, in Exodus and Deuteronomy, but it's also something that has been around since the time of Moses and was passed on to Aaron, Joshua, the judges, the kings, the prophets, all the way down to Ezra and the first great assembly where the Sanhedrin was first established by Ezra, and then finally it was carried on until about the 1st century and even past that point. What was given to Moses as the oral law on Mount Sinai is contained in what we know as today as the Talmud. And the Talmud, it consists of a variety of documents. It is not just one book. Similarly, the Bible is not just one book. This book did not come down from the sky. It did not come down from the sky completed in all 66 or 73 books, depending on which version of the Bible you read. It essentially is a library, a virtual library, where you have several books combined into one. And you have to look at the Talmud in the same fashion. It's not just one book. So some Christians will say, well, listen, the Talmud speaks badly about Jesus, so therefore we should just ignore the Talmud. It's a hateful book. And they use just the term book. That's not true. In fact, the mentioning of Jesus Christ in the Talmud makes up less than 1% of what the Talmud contains. So that's an overgeneralized statement. Also, when Christians say, well, listen, the final codification of the Jerusalem Talmud wasn't until 200 CE, the Babylonian Talmud 500 CE, so how is it reliable? It's so much based on oral tradition, it wasn't finally codified until that point. Well, this is where the double standard comes in, because according to the American Bible Association and Society, the following is recorded by them in the Learning Bible, which they publish, which says the following. According to biblical scholars, before anything in the Bible was written down, people told stories about God and God's relationship with the people we now read about in the Bible. This stage of passing on stories by word of mouth is known as the oral tradition. This stage of relating stories by word of mouth lasted for many years as families passed along the stories of their ancestors to each new generation. In the case of the Jewish scripture, the Old Testament, some stories were told for centuries before they were written down in final form. Eventually, as human societies in the Near East began to develop forms of writing that was easy to learn and use around 1800 BC, people began to write down the stories, songs, which became the Psalms, and the prophecies that would one day become the part of the Bible. So, in other words, and of course these were made into copies of copies and copies because we obviously don't have the originals. But my point is, the double standard is that when Christians look at the Talmud, they say, well, listen, this thing wasn't codified until 200 CE. So how is it reliable? Well, someone could obviously just turn to the Bible as a whole and say, well, look, this thing was oral tradition for centuries, according to biblical scholars of both Jewish and Christian persuasion, and was not finally codified or even written down until, the invention of writing, or until about 1800 BC, when it became a widespread use. So, my point is that you have to be consistent. If you're going to draw doubt upon the Talmud, you have to draw doubt upon the Bible as well. But having said that as well, we have to look at the things that we have in the Talmud today. Again, I said they were finally codified. Finalization, codification occurred by a time of 200 CE for the Jerusalem Talmud, 500 CE for the Babylonian Talmud. But that does not mean that the contents found, the opinions, oral tradition, laws, customs, cultural references, were not contained. That does not mean they were not contained in previous writing. In fact, we're told in the next link, if you would click on it at this point, is called An Introduction to the Talmud. And it's a book you can read from Google Book Search. And it makes a hefty reference that the vision and writing of the Talmud occurs during the reign of King Herod. This is before the time of Jesus. According to Karen Armstrong's book, in her chapter 5 called the Mishnah, she cites that even after the destruction of the temple, many of the rabbis convened in the coastal city of Yevna, where they began the writing and codification process of the Talmud and the Mishnah during the time of 70 AD, CE, which is, what do you know, right around the time of the Gospels, at least the Gospel of Mark. So my point is that you have the writing and codification of the Talmud occurring even before 200 CE. In fact, many scholars believe, and also according to the author of the Introduction to the Talmud, and in another book I've read called the Every Man's Talmud, written by another Jewish scholar, that the actual writing down of the oral tradition and laws and customs was as a result of a twofold event that occurred. One, because of the destruction of the temple, and because the destruction of the temple was destroyed, this was the center of learning, and the oral law was known by many scholars, just like the back of their hand, which is a custom that is still around today. I've met many Orthodox Jews that know the Talmud like the back of their hand, all the volumes of it. That they would have to start writing it down so that it would not be forgotten, because they had to start building new academies and schools to compensate for the destruction of the of the temple. The second point is that because, as a result of the Christians beginning to write down the New Testament, the Jews felt that they should also start to remember their oral tradition, begin writing them down as well, so they would not be forgotten. Both these theories go with the idea that as early as the 1st century, the Talmud was being codified, written down, subdivided, and shifting through all the chaotic traditions. So this misconception that because it was finally codified in 200 CE, again, I think this is really reminiscent of what we have to remember about the New Testament itself and the Bible itself. The canonization process did not occur for both books until when? Many years after the documents were written independently of each other, and many years after they were originally written. So you have to be consistent when you're studying this sort of type of scripture. We have various documents that are put into one huge form. So the Talmud is authentic to study it. Just like the Hadiths for the Muslims, you have a chain of transmission that go all the way back to a certain time. This rabbi said that this rabbi said that this rabbi said this, and it's authentic. They are considered authentic. The opinions are considered authentic, and they go all the way back even to the 1st century. So when we depart upon this journey of mine with this series that I'm going to make about the Passion of Christ, and I mentioned that it's a pretty good. It's a fact that these 1st century Jews believed this, because the Talmud mentions that this was the belief, the customs of the Jews for centuries. That to me is a fair statement. Whether you agree with the Talmud or not, whether you're Christian, you say, you know what, I don't believe in the Talmud, that's fine. But at least now, I hope with this video, regardless of your religious persuasion or lack thereof, you can appreciate viewing the New Testament through Jewish eyes, as they were written by Jews who understood their culture and their traditions. Thank you for watching. Peace.